My HOA Karen called 911. Not because of noise. Not because of parking, but because I changed my own Wi-Fi password. What the police discovered next ended her power trip instantly. It honestly started as one of the most boring, routine things imaginable. I'd been having random internet dropouts all week, videos buffering, smart lights disconnecting, work calls freezing mid-sentence. After checking with my provider and confirming there wasn't an outage, I did what any normal homeowner would do. I logged into my router and changed my Wi-Fi password. New password. Stronger encryption. Problem solved. Or at least, that's what I thought. Not even 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood HOA group chat. A message from Karen, our self-appointed community watchdog, popped up in all caps. Who turned off the internet? I ignored it at first, assuming someone else was having issues. Then another message followed, tagging my name directly. My connection just went down, and I know who did this. That's when I felt that familiar sinking feeling. The one you get when you realize peace is about to leave your life. A loud knock echoed through my front door. Not a polite knock. The kind that says someone is already angry and looking for a fight. I opened the door to find Karen standing there with her arms crossed, phone in hand, face red like she'd been rehearsing this confrontation all day. Before I could even say hello, she launched into it. She demanded to know why I had cut off the community Wi-Fi. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She claimed she'd been using my internet for months, and that everyone knew my router covered half the block. According to her, changing the password without HOA approval was against community rules. I calmly explained that it was my personal internet plan, in my name, that I paid for every month. Her response: she told me that once a signal crossed property lines, it became shared infrastructure. I actually asked her where she got that idea. She waved her phone and said, I Googled it. I tried to de-escalate. I told her there was no shared Wi-Fi agreement, no HOA policy, no consent, nothing. She accused me of being selfish, said I was hoarding bandwidths, and warned me that I was interfering with her ability to work, stream TV, and monitor her home security apps. That last part made me pause, but at the time I didn't fully understand why. When I told her the password wasn't coming back, her tone shifted. She stopped yelling and started smiling, the kind of smile that means someone has decided you're about to learn a lesson. She said, very clearly, fine, if you want to fix it. I'll let the authorities handle this. I assumed she meant the HOA board. I wished her a good night and closed the door. Less than 20 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through my living room windows. That's when it hit me. Karen hadn't called the HOA. She had called 911 because I changed my own Wi-Fi password. And that was only the beginning. By the next morning, Karen had turned my simple Wi-Fi password change into a full-blown neighborhood crisis. My phone started buzzing before I'd even finished my coffee. One message after another poured in from the HOA group chat, all forwarded by Karen. Screenshots, voice notes, paragraphs of text written like legal notices. She was telling everyone that I had unilaterally disabled community internet access, and that my actions were a violation of HOA bylaws that, as far as I knew, didn't exist. She claimed the internet signal coming from my house had been relied upon by multiple residents, and that cutting it off without notice was disruptive to the community. According to her, I had created a shared service expectation, which somehow obligated me to continue providing free internet indefinitely. She even suggested that my monthly bill should be reimbursed by the HOA, as if that retroactively justified her using it in the first place. Neighbors started reacting with confusion, some asking if there really was a community Wi-Fi agreement, others staying quiet but clearly watching the drama unfold. Karen wasn't satisfied with just stirring the pot online. She began knocking on doors, telling people her version of the story face to face. By noon, 2 neighbors had approached me asking awkwardly if I had really shut down something the HOA owned. That's when I realized how confidently she was spreading this lie. She spoke with such authority that people assumed it must be true. I pulled up the HOA rules, scrolled through every page, and confirmed what I already knew. There was nothing about shared internet, signal access, or digital utilities. It was all in her head. But Karen doubled down. She sent out a long email addressed to the entire HOA board, copying half the neighborhood, accusing me of running unauthorized network modifications. She implied that I could be operating illegal equipment, maybe even interfering with emergency services. The language was dramatic on purpose, buzzwords designed to scare people who didn't understand how home internet actually works. She ended the email by demanding immediate corrective action and potential fines. When the HOA president replied asking her to clarify what policy ID violated, Karen responded with links to random internet forums and a vague claim that other communities do it this way. She insisted that just because something wasn't written down didn't mean it wasn't an understood rule. That was her favorite phrase. Understood rule. Apparently, if Karen believed something strongly enough, it became law. What bothered me most was how personal it became. She accused me of intentionally targeting her, of abusing technology to assert control, of being hostile to the community. She even suggested that ID change the password to hide suspicious online activity, whatever that was supposed to mean. It was no longer about internet access. It was about power. Karen was furious that something she had quietly benefited from was suddenly out of her control. By the end of the day, she posted one final message in the group chat. If the HOA want to protect residents, I will. This matter is being escalated. No explanation. No details. Just a threat. At that point, I didn't know who she planned to call or what she planned to say, but I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't done. And whatever she was about to do next was going to be much worse than angry emails. I was in the middle of answering work emails when I heard the sound that made my stomach drop, a firm knock followed by a voice calling out, "Police department." For a second, I honestly thought it was a prank. Then I looked out the window and saw the patrol car parked in front of my house, lights still flashing softly. Neighbors had already started peeking through blinds. The unspoken HOA pastime whenever drama arrived in uniform. I opened the door slowly, hands visible, trying to process how a Wi-Fi password change had somehow escalated to this. Two officers stood on my porch, calm but serious. One of them asked if I was the homeowner and if I had recently disabled internet access affecting other residents. That wording alone told me Karen had been busy. I confirmed my name and said yes. I had changed my personal Wi-Fi password. Nothing more. They explained that they received a 911 call reporting suspicious digital activity, including claims that I was running unauthorized equipment, interfering with communications, and possibly accessing devices that didn't belong to me. I almost laughed, but the officers weren't joking. So I didn't. I asked who had made the call. They didn't say her name, but they didn't need to. I already knew. Karen had apparently told dispatch that she and other neighbors suddenly lost internet service and that I had admitted to controlling the network. She claimed this outage posed a safety risk, citing security cameras and emergency apps that no longer worked. She even suggested I might be spying on residents or manipulating their connections. The officers made it clear they were there to verify the situation, not take sides, but when someone uses words like 911 and safety threat, they have to check it out. I invited them inside and showed them my router setup. One officer nodded almost immediately. It was a standard residential modem and router, nothing fancy, nothing illegal. I pulled up my service agreement on my phone, showing that the account was in my name only. I explained that ID never shared the password intentionally and that any access neighbors had was without my permission. The officers listened carefully, occasionally exchanging looks that suggested they already had a pretty good idea of what was going on. While we were talking, one of the officers asked an interesting question. "Do you know how long your neighbor has been connected to your network?" I told him I didn't, but that I suspected it had been a while. He asked if ID noticed slow speeds or unusual activity before changing the password. Suddenly, things started to click. Those random dropouts, the lag, the devices disconnecting. After about 15 minutes, the officers stepped outside to make a few calls. That's when Karen appeared. Like she'd been waiting for her moment. She marched across the street. Phone raised. Already talking before she reached them. She launched into a dramatic explanation, pointing at my house and repeating her accusations, insisting I had confessed and demanding that they do something. The officer stopped her mid-sentence. One of them asked her to lower her voice. The other asked her a simple question. Ma'am, how were you accessing his internet? Karen froze, just for a second. And in that second, I knew calling 911 over Wi-Fi had been a massive mistake. When the officer asked Karen how she had been accessing my internet, the confident, unstoppable rant she'd been delivering suddenly stalled. She tried to laugh it off at first, saying the signal was open and that everyone knew it was available. The officer calmly asked her again, this time more clearly, whether she had permission to use my network. Karen's answer shifted from confident to defensive in seconds. She said she assumed it was allowed because it had worked before. That was all the officers needed to hear. One of them turned back to me and asked if I'd ever given her the password or approved her using my Wi-Fi. I said no. I explained that I'd never shared the password with anyone outside my household and that I only realized someone else had been using it when my connection started acting strange. The officer nodded and asked if I'd be willing to log into my router settings again. Right there, on the front porch. I pulled it up. What showed up on the screen changed the entire tone of the situation. There weren't just one or two unknown devices connected to my network. There were several. Phones, tablets, smart TVs, and something else that made the officers exchange a look. A wireless security camera. Not mine. The officer asked me to click into the device details, and the name on the connection didn't belong to anyone in my house. It belonged to Karen. The officer asked her directly if she had security cameras in her home. Karen hesitated, then said yes. He asked if they were connected to Wi-Fi. Another pause. When he asked whose Wi-Fi they were connected to, she didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that nearby neighbors had started to gather, pretending to water plants or check mail while listening to every word. The officer explained very plainly that connecting devices to someone else's private network without permission was not a minor issue. It wasn't just borrowing internet. It was unauthorized access. And the fact that cameras were involved raised even more concerns. Karen immediately tried to flip the script, accusing me of spying on her feeds since the cameras had been on my network. That backfired instantly. The officer shut that down and explained that, if anything, the situation suggested the opposite, that she had been routing her devices through my service without consent. They asked her how many devices she had connected. She tried to downplay it, but the router logs told a different story. Multiple devices had been connecting regularly, some at odd hours, some pulling large amounts of data. That explained everything: the slow speeds, the dropped connections, the strange activity that had pushed me to change the password in the first place. At that point, the officers stopped treating this like a misunderstanding. They informed Karen that falsely calling 911 was a serious offense and that misusing emergency services over a personal dispute could carry consequences. They also explained that her unauthorized network access could be considered a violation of privacy laws, depending on how the devices had been used. Karen's face went pale. The authority she relied on evaporated. Her voice dropped. Her posture collapsed. And suddenly, the woman who stormed across the street demanding justice was quietly asking if they could just talk this out. But it was too late. What she expected to be a power move had turned into a spotlight, one that exposed exactly what she'd been doing all along. By the time the officers finished documenting everything, the energy on the street had completely shifted. Karen wasn't shouting anymore. She wasn't threatening or lecturing or demanding action. She stood off to the side, arms folded tightly, avoiding eye contact as the reality of what she'd done settled in. The neighbors who had gathered were no longer watching me, they were watching her. The story she'd been telling all day was unraveling in real time. One of the officers explained the next steps very clearly. Karen would receive a formal warning for misuse of emergency services. Any future false 911 calls, especially over non-emergencies like this, could lead to fines or charges. He also advised her firmly that she was to immediately disconnect all of her devices from any network she did not own or have explicit permission to use. The warning wasn't too loud, but it was unmistakably serious. Then came the part Karen clearly hadn't prepared for. The officer suggested documenting the incident with the HOA board, not as a complaint from her, but as a report against her. He explained that what she'd been doing wasn't a community benefit, or understood rule. It was unauthorized access and harassment. And the paper trail she'd created herself, emails, group chat messages, and the 911 call would now work against her. Within days, the HOA board reached out to me directly. They apologized for the stress and confusion and confirmed, in writing, that there was no such thing as community Wi-Fi and never had been. They also confirmed that no resident had the authority to demand access to another homeowner's utilities. Karen was instructed to stop representing herself as an HOA enforcer and to cease all direct communication with neighbors regarding violations. The neighborhood atmosphere changed almost overnight. People who had stayed quiet before started sharing their own experiences with Karen doorstep confrontations, threats of fines, exaggerated rule interpretations. It turned out this wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the first time she'd gone far enough to involve police and get caught. Karen withdrew. She stopped posting in the HOA group chat. She stopped knocking on doors. When she did appear outside, she kept her head down and avoided conversation. The authority she once wielded through intimidation was gone, replaced by a reputation she couldn't spin her way out of. As for me, I secured my network properly, new passwords, stronger encryption, device monitoring. My internet speed returned to normal. The random dropouts vanished. More importantly, my home felt peaceful again. No pounding on the door. No passive-aggressive emails. No imaginary rules. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen had tried to control something that was never hers. And in doing so, she exposed her own behavior. Calling 911 over a Wi-Fi password wasn't just an overreaction, it was the move that ended her reign entirely. And every time I log into my router now, I can't help but smile, knowing that one simple password change did what years of HOA meetings never could. If you enjoy real HOA karma stories where entitled neighbors finally face consequences, make sure you subscribe because there are plenty more just like this.